Welcome to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast with your host, Tony Guerra. The Pharmacy Leaders Podcast is a member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network, with interviews and advice on building your professional network, brand, and a purposeful second income from students, residents, and innovative professionals.
Hey, welcome to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast. Just wanted to give you a quick intro. We're going to hear the second half of Joanna Penn in just a minute. But I wanted to let you know a friend of mine, Janet Kennedy, president and podcast host of Get Social Health, is asking for people to help her with some abstracts. So what you're doing is you're taking a medical abstract or something like that and you're making it a bit simpler. I asked her a couple of questions. The timetable is that it's due June 30th. Anytime before that is okay. If you would want to put it on your CV, it would be a writing project for the Healthcare Marketing Network, HMN. And, are you being paid? You get paid $5 per abstract. It covers the time to assess the abstract that might not be relevant. And it should make you about $30 to $50 an hour. You work at your own pace, and there's no limit on how many you can do. This is for PubMed, so it's a huge project. It's going to be covering whatever topics are on the file, and there's no necessary background in writing. It's just common sense. So if you are obviously a pharmacist or a pharmacy student, you should be in good shape. I asked if they have to be a writer, and the answer is no. And then there's a number of the abstracts that are informal medical speak. So again, the way to contact her is, let me give you the email that she wanted me to give you. So Janet, Janet, at healthcaremarketingnetwork.com. Janet at healthcaremarketingnetwork.com. And you can email her directly with this opportunity. She's a great person. That talked to her, Carol Bush, Janine Kalbach, all of them over there. So I really like the business that they're doing. So now, not to leave it any longer, Joanna Penn from Bath, England. She's going to finish the second part of her episode with us, talking about how you can be an author and how you can make a living at it. Again, she's doing really great, and she started with nothing. So here it comes.
Okay, well, tell me a little bit about, a lot of times people are like, okay, I'm going to be a writer, so they go back to their, especially people with more money than time, like pharmacists, physicians, will tend to gravitate towards MFAs, Master of Fine Arts in writing, and there are these, low residency MFAs. You go to some exotic place for 10 days, you write, you hear all these things, and then you get feedback in between. You and Chandler Bolt are my mobile MFA in terms of your podcast. Can you tell me a little bit about what you would recommend someone start reading from yours before they go and spend $20,000 or $30,000 on an MFA? And I'm not necessarily anti-MFA. I'm anti just go to the MFA first. I'm like, well, there's a lot out there. Maybe you should start with something free first, or something that's $15 on Audible rather than just drop $20,000 or $30,000.
Oh, and it's so interesting because I've been talking to my husband about this. My husband has 3 degrees, and we were talking about how, and I have 2 degrees.
I have 5.
Yeah, exactly. And I went to Oxford, and but it's funny because I think people like us like learning, so we love to learn, and we also value a stamp of some kind, a stamp that says, well, I have a degree in this, so that must mean something. But the MFA is a really interesting thing. So what I want people to start thinking about is completely reframe the idea of what a writer is in that way. So most working writers, I would probably say 99% of working writers don't have an MFA. And when I say working writers, I mean people who are paid for their writing. The people who run MFAs will often have one book or a couple of books, but they won't make the bulk of their income from their writing. They'll make it from their teaching. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what you have to do if you want to write is figure out, where do you want to get to? So if you want to teach writing, then for sure look at an MFA, because that's where it will take you. People with MFAs become MFA teachers. But if you want to write thrillers, then don't go anywhere near an MFA, because one, they won't necessarily want you to write a
No
zombie.
genre allowed.
Yeah, no genre. There are some genre MFAs, but what you have to do is, if you look at someone like me, I make, X percent. I make like a 6-figure income from book sales, and then I have income streams from other things. But those books are genre fiction, so thrillers. I have some sweet romance under another name, and my nonfiction books. Chandler is a teacher, but he is based around nonfiction. So we're quite different in that way, but I think we have similar energy, quite up energy. But the question of the MFA is, are you leaning towards an MFA? Not you, I mean anyone listening.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Are you leaning towards an MFA because you are the type of person who loves to learn, but in reality, you are going to get much more writing done if you do not do another degree? Just write. Just sit down and write. And this is the thing that changed my life. 2 things changed my life with writing. The first one was timed writing. So set a 20-minute timer, literally 20 minutes, and instead of Googling MFAs, sit down and write for 20 minutes and then stop and look at what you've written, and maybe you've written a couple of hundred words, and that's how you write. And then the second thing is realizing that the first draft is just the first draft, and editing is what makes a finished product. So if the writing you just did in 20 minutes is a pile of crap, that's fine, because you can turn lots of those into a book when you go through the editing process. So understanding the first draft won't go anywhere, won't be seen, it is good. So I really think that you have to decide where you want to get to, and also be really honest about what you love. Because the other thing, as I said, I'm very educated, so are you, so are the listeners. But when I read for pleasure and fun and escapism, and I read action adventure thrillers, and I like movies like Con Air, and I just watched Thor Ragnarok. And
very good one. Very good.
Yeah, brilliant. Because I think when you have a very brain job and you're tired, you just want something that's fun and escapist. And that's the thing. If you want to write apocalyptic zombie books or romance or sci-fi or whatever, do that, and don't worry about getting a degree in it, because that won't make any difference.
Okay, well, that gives us a great transition into what's next. When I was doing my research for this podcast episode, I go right to Audible, and I got the Healthy Writer. But then I also, anytime in my Audible, there's only 2 open at a time. It's always one fiction and one nonfiction, but it's very rare that I get to have the same author as the fiction and nonfiction. So can you first talk about how the Arcane series, how you do 2 different brands? Because people are working hard enough to have one single brand. How do you have 2 completely different brands, which is a nonfiction one, Joanna Penn, and then the fiction one, which is JF Penn? Can you talk about branding a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So the main thing was that branding really is about your promise to the reader. So you're primarily interviewing Joanna Penn, and we're talking about things that Joanna Penn writes about. But I've been on podcasts about dreaming or religion or writing about death, as JF Penn, because my books my thrillers are about that other side of me, maybe partly a shadow side, but also a sort of different part of my brain that is fascinated with religion and architecture and travel and conspiracies and all of these types of things. Yeah, so it's very necessary for me creatively as a happy human to have both sides. I think people are very lucky if they can focus on one thing.
Sure.
But I can't. I feel like I love doing nonfiction because I love helping other people. And I think helping people is a very natural human thing. But I also need my fiction to kind of feed my darker creative side. So managing the 2 brands is mostly about separation of my audience. So jfpenn.com, I have Instagram separately, I have Pinterest separately, I have different emails, I don't have a podcast, I do have blog articles and things like that. But mainly people who know JF Penn know me through my books. They will read those thrillers. So partly for me, it's a creative need, and partly for the audience, it helps them understand who they're getting.
Yeah.
And that's really important. Also, just in a world of big data, as we talk, there's a lot of talk about big data, but the algorithms on Amazon are very important. And I'm sure everyone knows, you'll get an email that said, hey, you like this, you might also like that, or things pop up in your when you log on that kind of recommend things. So the recommendations very much work with the type of author, the genre. So I also wanted my also boughts on Amazon to come up in the right way. So if people do feel like this, like for example, if somebody listening is published in a medical journal and you're working as a pharmacist, and that's your official name, then maybe use a different name if you want to write some erotica or some horror or something that someone might judge you with. But perhaps if like Michael Crichton, Michael Crichton was a medical doctor before he started writing thrillers, but his first thrillers were medical thrillers. So The Andromeda Strain was, I think, his first one. Yes. And so, he really tapped into if you're writing things that your existing people who know you are not going to be freaked out about, then you can definitely go with that. Can use both, but otherwise, maybe use another name.
Okay. Well, so I'm going to guess that Stone of Fire is probably available free if it's an ebook and it was your first in the series, but I bought it because it's an audiobook, and I don't know what free is because I buy all audiobooks.
I'm sorry.
But tell me a little bit about so I've heard that to make great fiction, the nonfiction part of it has to be spot on. That is, that your readers will break if they find that you're talking about a place, and when they went there, that's not how it is. So tell me a little bit about how your visits to these places, how your Oxford studies leaned into, you can do Stone of Fire or maybe a different book that's more recent for you, but how do you make sure that the nonfiction is spot on so that we don't lose our suspension of disbelief?
Yeah, so for me, when I looked at designing my future life, when I, back sort of 10 years ago, one of the things I wrote down was I want to travel, and I want to write, and I want to read. So those were the things I wanted to do with my time. So my fiction, very much my travels feed into it. So for example, I have a book called One Day in Budapest, which is based on a trip that my husband and I did to Budapest. And I've actually sort of had people who've gone to Budapest and read my book and gone to the places. So I know that book works in terms of a physical place and also the political situation. So it's a very right-wing political situation. So most of my thrillers have places and architecture and religious either truth or myth, depending on how you see it. And then I just twist things into the fiction. So you should be able to read it and be like, yep, this is plausible. And they're modern day thrillers. All of them. Yeah, I have a couple of fantasy novels. So, of course, they are made up, but they also are based in real life. So Map of Shadows, which is my most recent novel, which is not in audiobooks yet. So you
I know. I'm waiting.
Well, but that one opens in Bath, which is where I live now, and is based on a shop that is just around the corner, a map shop. So it's based on maps, obviously. So for me, it's partly because I love travel, and then I love turning my travel into stories. And either I'm writing about places I have been. So a lot of my books have Israel in because I've traveled to Israel a lot. So End of Days was the one before Map of Shadows, and that was written again after a trip to Israel. And then places I haven't been. So Stone of Fire does include a scene in Iran, and I have not been to Iran, although I really would love to go. And yeah, some other places. For example, Gates of Hell has scenes underneath the water in the Dead Sea, diving in the Dead Sea, which is very dangerous and you can die. So Luckily you can Google these things. But for me, it's fun. I want to enjoy the process of creating a story, and then hopefully the reader will also enjoy the story. So Stone of Fire is a free ebook, so people can download that. It is, as you know, the first in a 9-book series, and I also a crime series, which starts with Desecration. So if people like darker books, then that might be the place to start.
Okay, well, let's finish up with something that you've talked about Map of Shadows in your recent entry into screenwriting. Things got a little, you said maybe things got a little tired in certain ways with the writing, and you wanted something a little bit fresher with the screenwriting. But you mentioned that somebody said that's $100 million movie. And I think they said it in the pejorative, like, you'll never make that. Nobody will ever make that. Who are you to write a $100 million movie script? Maybe you should be writing a little script where you can put in $50,000 and make a movie. I think a lot of people that try to write stop writing because they reject themselves. Can you tell me how you got the confidence to continue writing? And the way that I would spin that would say that, well, hey, you know what? You can get this book for $5 on Amazon. That's $100 million movie, and you can get it now. So you want to talk about a great discount? This is a great discount. But tell me a little bit about not the trolls and the haters. There aren't that many of them, but they do affect you. And then your own internal monologue saying, oh, who are you to be a writer? Who are you to put this out there? So maybe a little bit about gaining that confidence.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is the truth of it, the self-doubt, the fear of failure, the fear of judgment, all of that never goes away. It's part of the creative process. I know people writers in their 70s, very successful writers who still feel this. So you have to accept that is part of the creative process. And my book, The Successful Author Mindset, really goes into that. And I've been talking about that on my YouTube channel because it's amazing how many people don't realize that this is completely normal to feel this way. And again, coming back to the sort of degree thing, often we think by getting a degree, that might make it go away.
It doesn't.
It doesn't. No, that imposter syndrome. I mean, I have imposter syndrome, and I've got like 28 books, and whatever. I make a good living with my writing, and still I feel, I went into the screenwriting course feeling like a novice. So yeah, don't worry about that. That will always be there. But I think what again, it's coming back to, and I think my awareness of death, and I hope that pharmacists and medical specialists listening feel this too. We will die. This is not a surprise. Yes. So if you think about your life, like, what do you want to do with your life? I was unhappy with what I was doing with my life. And every day that I write something, I'm happier with my life. So it has to be a daily practice, or if you can't do it daily, then what are you creating over a year, for example? Can you write that book over a year or 2 years, or however you can fit it in, so that you feel that you're progressing in your life? And then the definition of success, it is, as you say, it is very unlikely that Map of Shadows will ever become a movie. But in writing that screenplay, I had a lot of fun. It was so much fun. And I learned a lot about story structure. I love learning, as we discussed. And it was a 6-day course, which is a lot cheaper than an MFA.
Sure.
So this is the thing, I think. And also, I've written a lot of different types of books now. I just needed a bit of a refreshment. And so now I'm thinking more now that this is an episodic life, that as a writer, you have this, you focus on a book, everything goes into this book, and then you finish the book, and then what are you doing next? I like writing a nonfiction book next, or am I going to write a screenplay? So it's for your own creative success, and success defined as you are producing work you're happy with, even if it never sells at all. That's really the point. And I guess, but I just want to remind people that sort of 10 years ago, I had none of this. I had no website, I had no Twitter, I had no fiction. I hadn't even written a novel 10 years ago. My life was completely different. But by making a choice every day towards the life I wanted, incredibly, I made it to the life I wanted, which was to be a full-time author. And now my definition of success is, well, what do I want to create next? So my next book that I was working on this morning is How to Write Nonfiction, which is completely different to Map of Shadows screenplay. but
it certainly keeps things fresh. And as a writer, you certainly probably do get some fatigue from one or the other.
Yeah, exactly. It's refreshing, and I'm really enthusiastic about it. And also, it will help people, because every day people ask me, it's a bit like successful self-publishing. I didn't write that for me. I did not need that book. I wrote it for people who ask me the same questions every single day. So it's like, oh, well, here you go. Here's the book with everything in it, and I keep it updated. So with How to Write Nonfiction, it's kind of the same way. I'm like, okay, I've written 9 nonfiction books now. I can write a book about this. And, but after that, I'll get back to writing that American Arcane novel. So this is the thing. It's exciting to be creatively prolific. And to me, the independent mindset means I can publish anything I want. And even if it doesn't sell much, it doesn't really matter, because I'm creatively fulfilled. Obviously, I prefer it if it sells.
Sure. Sure. Okay. Well, I've asked you a lot of questions. Is there anything you wanted to say in closing that I haven't asked you?
Well, I guess I really just want to encourage people. If people are still listening, if they haven't turned us off, then they probably are interested in maybe writing a book, maybe writing a novel. I get a lot of, doctors, lawyers, pharmacists, very educated people who want to write books, because, of course, we read books. A lot of our life is based on books and learning. But what I would say is, try stepping away from that sort of, must get a degree approach, and think about being a bit freer with your creativity. And that will really help. And also double down on what you love. Like I said, if you love Thor Ragnarok, then write something like that. You don't have to write a Booker Prize winning novel or a Pulitzer Prize winning nonfiction book. These are really get to know what you love, and then maybe do it for some fun. That's the other thing. We all take ourselves so seriously, but this can be really fun, and it can make you a living. So I hope that helps. And I have a podcast, the Creative Penn podcast, Penn with a double N. And obviously everything else is at my website, thecreativepenn.com.
Okay, Joanna, thanks so much for being on the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Tony.
Support for this episode comes from the audiobook Memorizing Pharmacology, a relaxed approach. With over 9,000 sales in the United States, United Kingdom, and Australia, it's the go-to resource to ease the pharmacology challenge. Available on Audible, iTunes, and Amazon.com, in print, ebook, and audiobook. Thank you for listening to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast with your host, Tony Guerra. Be sure to share the show with the hashtag #PharmacyLeaders.